Welcome to In Presence We Trust, a podcast about the art and heart of holding group transformational spaces. I'm Rachel Rickards, founder of the field Facilitator Training. In Presence We Trust is a sanctuary for aspiring and experienced facilitators seeking to evolve their facilitation and embodied leadership. This podcast is designed to empower facilitators, leaders, and individuals from all walks of life to harness the transformative power of presence in their work and personal life. In this episode, I speak with a very special guest named Robin Alfred. Robin spent 15 years as a trainer, educator, and social work manager in London before moving to Scotland. There, he founded the Findhorn Consultancy Service and later Open Circle Counseling. In the conversation you're about to hear, Robin and I explore the concept of field facilitation. We discuss the definition of a field and the emergence of group dynamics. We delve into the practice of facilitation, emphasizing deep listening, soul-led decision-making, and integrating mysticism in leadership and group work. If you're ready to jump in and begin, join me by taking a deep breath. Hello, and welcome back to In Presence We Trust. Today, I'm joined by a brilliant man called Robin Alfred, and I'm 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 so excited today because I've had a real love affair with a brilliant article that Robin wrote that I've just been kind of almost infatuated with and dissecting and then I reached out to Robin because I was like, I have to know more about you and I have to be introduced to your work because there's something here that is just so resonant. And also, I don't know how to share about this. There's just like a sparkle of potential that I'm wanting to fully devote myself to. So today is just going to be a really inspiring, engaging conversation with Robin and I. And I just want to say welcome, Robin, and thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Rachel. Great to see you here. I'm so happy that you enjoyed the article. I wrote it a while ago, and I feel like I should have reread it before we have our conversation now. But I'm sure it'll all come back as we talk.
It'll all come back because there's so much of it that I'm going to refer back to. I mean, I think a whole book could be written from this article, especially from the wealth of information of collective experience of facilitation. So your article is called the art of facilitating transformational group fields. And in that, you're one of very few or first people to refer to this as the field. Like this is a kind of a newer term, but now that's like spreading like wildfire. And I'd love to just hear your definition of what a field is, and particularly like also the difference between a field of transformation and what makes that different from a field where there isn't transformation happening.
Great. Well, let's take a metaphor. So let's suppose that I'm writing on a flip chart. And I'm writing the word facilitation on a flip chart. So I write the word Facilitation. That's 11 letters. So we might say there's individual, system, and field. So there are 11 individual letters. Together they make up a system, which we would call a word, facilitation. The field is the paper. Yeah. The field is what holds the system. The field is what the system is embedded in, which we might experience as atmosphere. We might experience as field of intelligence that surrounds us. It's what life is embedded in. it's a bit hard to describe because it's very intangible. But for people who do, for example, constellation work, increasingly people are also working with family and organizational constellations derived from the work of Gerd Hellinger. People who do constellation work where individuals represent different aspects of a system, and then they invite the representatives to kind of feel into what's coming through them, let's say, as representatives in a system, symbolic representatives in a system. They tap into the intelligence of the field. The field is kind of what surrounds the system. And when we sensitize ourselves, we can get those moments of insight, inspiration that flow into us from the field. They flow into the system, through the system, they flow into us individually. And I don't know if that really answers your question about a definition of the field, but it's a little hard to describe it because it's a very intangible thing, but I think it's something that we experience often. You walk into a room, let's say you walk into a cathedral, right, where people have been meditating for 500 years, right? You walk into the cathedral and you feel something, right? The field. There's a field there that is charged with an intention to connect to the sacred, maybe an intention to bow down, an intention to cultivate humility, an intention of prayer. That has created a field that's charging that atmosphere. You walk to a playground school, the dinner break, it's a different field, right? That's a field that's very different. So we sense the atmospheres is probably the easiest way to kind of say what a field is, but it's kind of what a system is embedded in. And increasingly, I think the skill for both facilitators and leaders is to become field sensors. We've done a lot of work around, like if you've tracked like the evolution of leadership, let's say, we've done a lot of work around moving from individual competencies to understanding that there's a systemic approach to life and a systemic approach to an organization, a systemic approach to leadership. And increasingly, I think we want to understand that what's the field that we create that holds the system. And as you say, that field, maybe to come to the second question you bring, that field can be a transformational field or a slightly less transformational field. And my experience of creating the transformational field is really, it's kind of like an equation in a way, but we can, of course, as you say, we can write a whole book about each aspect of this, is to say that the more presence we bring, and for sure we could write a thesis about what is presence, but the more presence we bring, and the more shared intention we bring, so presence plus intention, plus I would say vulnerability, creates a coherent field. And that's a transformational field. When the field is coherent, it becomes transformational. And that means that, and we will have experienced this at different times in our life, I'm sure as facilitators, but in life also, when the field is charged, like everybody's awake, everybody's there, and there's a common calling, like why everybody's there, which we call intention. And there's a degree of kind of openness and vulnerability. So the heart is a bit open, it's not so defended. That atmosphere is kind of charged. It's like it's magnetic, it's potent, it's awake. And into that space drop all sorts of insights. Insights come in, relationships unblock where there's been challenges, synchronicities happen, synergies emerge, like all sorts of things happen. It feels like a magical space. And the good news for facilitators, I think, is that we can create that. If we understand that, we can also start to create that by amplifying presence, by being conscious of intention, by modeling and inviting vulnerability and emotion into the space. And then we start to feel like, oh, that feels like pregnant now. Which means birth is going to happen, something new is going to arise in the space.
I'm so curious, in your journey as a facilitator, I imagine there was like a pre-field time and then a post-field time. And I'm curious, like, what lives there in the middle that shifted you, that made that shift for you?
Yeah, totally. I can track my facilitation career in terms of like some magical moments in a way. So, I used to run groups in London. I was a criminal justice social worker in the East End of London.
Wow.
That's my kind of early life. My degree is in criminology. That's kind of what I studied and what I did. And I would run groups and facilitate groups, and I'd have a flip chart, like have an agenda, and I'd say 10 minutes for this and 20 minutes for that, and 50 minutes for this, and that was how I did it. And then I came to Findhorn, which is where I live at the moment, which is an eco-village in the north of Scotland. It's also a spiritual community. I've been here for nearly 30 years now.
Wow.
And I arrived, and much to my surprise, was invited to run a reinvention process. The community was in a crisis. I was invited to leadership. And I remember facilitating a meeting. So I thought I'd bring together like 6 or 8 of the kind of change agents in the community. And I thought, okay, my job is to facilitate this. So I come in and I flip chart and I say 10 minutes of introduction and 20 minutes look at this. And they all started laughing. And I said, why are you laughing? And they said, well, what if the energy doesn't want to do that? And I thought, what planet are these people living on? What do you mean, what if the energy doesn't want to? This is what we're going to do. This is our task. We have to kind of agree X, Y, Z by 12 o'clock. So this is how we're going to do it. And they just refused to do it. They said, yeah, but our energy might be saying something different. And I thought, okay, I need to unlearn what I've learned about facilitation, because how they do facilitation at Findhorn is clearly different. And then I studied process work, which is a discipline of, created by Arnie and Amy Mendel's for psychologists, and they created this very powerful process or training in process work. So I did some training in process work, but really I just kind of watched how people facilitated and learned a lot from that about how to kind of work with the energy of a group. And then I met my current teacher, a man called Thomas Hubel, who is a very awake, I would say, contemporary mystic, who also models a lot, kind of working with emergence, like what's actually emerging in a group. So I was watching him, so I'm watching all these people do things. And I start to feel that what's more alive, what's more awake in me and in a group is what's kind of on the edge and what's emerging. So I start to work with less and less of a plan and more emergence. And I notice that I feel juicy. I feel like alive. I feel awake. I feel like this is interesting. And I start to run a program at Findhorn called the Findhorn International Forum on Sustainability. And it was 5 days and it had no program. Right? People would come and say, what's the agenda? I say, the agenda is session, go home. That's the agenda. I don't know what we're going to do. Right? And I thought, that's how I want to work, because that means I meet the group where it is, rather than with what I think they need to know. How do I know what they need to know until I've met them? And then we co-create something in the space. So it was a kind of journey of less and less structure and more emergence, and feeling that was interesting for me and felt like it served a group much better than coming with a plan. I started to move from training people with like, here's a training in leadership, into facilitating. And then I actually had one moment, maybe I could describe this moment, when I was facilitating a conference here. So we had a week-long conference called the New Story Summit, which was an attempt to bring together a lot of people to elaborate new narratives for science, education, law, spirituality, like different disciplines. And I and a colleague were facilitating this. So we have a week with 400 people in the Universal Hall. I'm pointing over there because it's over there. And it's Wednesday morning, and my co-facilitator is sick. She's had to go to hospital. So this is me and 400 people. And I think, okay, but we have a plan, because the previous day we had constituted an open space day. So open space, which you probably know, but maybe not everybody does, is where the group kind of self-organizes into lots of little discussion groups. So we had a plan. We had all these post-its and all these venues and time slots. And I thought, well, this is an easy day for me anyway, because we agreed yesterday these are all the things we're going to do, and that we signed up for them. I come in, it's due to start at 9 o'clock. I come in at 8:45, feeling like all I need to do is just get mic'd up and the day's going to run itself, and discover that this whole plan has been destroyed. Somebody has come in the middle of the night and rearranged all these post-its, like hundreds of post-its, which was the plan for the day, into a big sign that says, "We don't know." Right? So I come in and the plan is gone.
Ah.
And I noticed myself, and I think, oh, this is interesting. But that was interesting, right? One of the ushers says to me, do you want to know who did this? I think I know who did this. I said, no, I don't want to know who did this, because it's not about that. This is clearly a voice in the field that is saying there's too much structure here and we don't know, and we need to be more emergent. And I noticed I was very calm, actually. I just thought, well, I'm really interested now what's going to happen, because clearly I had no plan of what's going to happen. And I stood there with 400 people in front of me, and I said, well, I don't know what we're going to do now, but this is what's happened. And the conference convener, actually very interestingly, energetically, he just came and stood by me. He didn't say anything the whole morning, but he just stood by me. So I had a kind of energetic support person, which probably helped anchor me a bit. But basically, through the morning, I was just kind of downloading in a moment, like moment by moment, what needed to happen next. Like now we're going to have silence. Now we're just going to pass the mic around and everybody can speak. Now we're going to sit in silence for 10 minutes. Now we're going to move into whatever. It just was kind of coming to me like, oh, this is the next beat. And then and then this is the next beat, and this is the next beat. And by the end of the morning, we had reconstituted, we had voiced what needed to be voiced, we had a plan for the afternoon that was kind of more coherence. Let's say we had built more coherence again, because I come in and the group is highly fragmented.
Of course,
Some people thought that this, we don't know, was an act of vandalism. Other people thought it was an act of inspired leadership, like very different orientations to this change. And two men came to me at the end, so we'll never forget, they came to me in tears, right? And they said, wow, you're like a magician in this space. And I didn't feel like I had done anything, actually. I felt light as a feather. I felt like something had been coming through me into the space, which is what needed to happen. And I think the reason that they were so moved by it, touched by it, was because in a way magic happens. Right? And we probably all know those experiences in the facility where suddenly something just goes, wow, it's like, I'm not really doing much, but something's coming through that's into the space and magic is happening. And I thought that moment was one of the moments where I thought, this is how I want to facilitate. I want to facilitate from a place of emergence. I want to facilitate the field. And so I wrote a little bit about that, and I've been building since then.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm fascinated by just in the work that I've been doing now, training people in this style of facilitation, is what you have to meet in yourself to be able to hold a field in that mystery. And I'm curious about like your own translation of that for yourself. And if it was it just something that came natural and it was very easy, or were there parts of yourself that you had to confront to start to be able to hold the magnitude of that unknowingness? And like, could you qualify what some of those skills that you had to develop were?
Yeah, such a great question. I mean, I think because it all starts with what's the safety that I experience and the spaciousness that I experience in myself. So for me, that's been an ongoing kind of journey of spiritual practice and teachings and many things for at least 30 years. So, and that's sometimes what people say. They say, how can I learn to facilitate? And I say, well, facilitation is a way of life. It's not a set of tools. It's not a set of, I mean, it's helpful to have a few tools and to know how to facilitate whatever open space or World Café or Proaction cafes and things like that. That's kind of helpful, but that's not really facilitation. Facilitation is a way of life. So it's much more, how do I meet whatever situation I'm meeting with curiosity, with interest, with spaciousness, groundedness. Because if I'm spacious and grounded and curious, what can go wrong, right? It's just like whatever's happening is happening. It's interesting, right? So I have to move away from an idea that a group ought to be having a certain experience. Then I'm immediately under pressure. I'm contracting around my expectations. I'm probably going to push the group in a certain direction. I have an idea, a concept, like a good group feels like this, and a bad group feels like this, and a difficult group is like this, and an easy group is like this. So those are just concepts. So I want to be present. I want to be grounded, which is why I meditate an hour every morning to kind of ground myself and to feel like what's the spaciousness, what's happening inside me. So I want to develop self-awareness. I want to cultivate sensitivity, sensing capacity. Sure, there's a capacity to sense also, so this vessel wants to become more and more refined. So it senses more and more, which probably means it wants to slow down and notice. So there's, I think, a lot of different practices that help create the right condition here to be a facilitator who can hold emergence. O'Brien, much quoted former CEO of Hanover Insurance, said the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. Right, and that's what it's all about, really. So I need to start here.
Yeah.
And then I noticed, because for sure there's going to be things that trigger me. There's going to be places where I go off. There's places where other things happen. But I want to be able to notice that. Oh, now I'm triggered. Okay, this person is irritating me. Right? It's going to happen. So it's not like I'm going to pretend that I love everybody and everything is great and I have no triggers. Of course, there's going to be somebody in a group that irritates me. So then I want to notice that. Okay, so I notice this person irritates me. I want to notice how it feels physically. I want to ground myself. I want to practice staying emotionally connected to a person. Like as soon as I disconnect, then I'm going to lose the magic in a way. If I'm disconnected from a person in a group, then the group starts to become a bit more fragmented and less can drop into the space. The more I stay open, or I'm doing a loop like this, the more I stay open, the more something can drop into that space because the space becomes more coherent again. So I want to notice where I might go away and come back. I want to notice where I might push the group away and come back. I want to notice if the group feels far away, the group feels close. Am I really represented in the group? Do I feel the group inside me? Does it feel like a distant object that I'm having a transactional relationship to? Which is how I would experience facilitation, say, 30 years ago. There's me and there's a group, but I will now facilitate the group. That's very different from kind of joining the group energy, joining the group field, and then allowing something, which isn't to say I don't have a role, like a leadership role as a facilitator. Facilitation is also leadership. But to do that in relation to a group and feel the group not distant from me, all those things are kind of practices.
Mm-hmm.
Those are practices for life, like with my partner, with my friends, with everybody. Like, can I be curious and interested in whatever is arising?
Yes. Yes. And as you're like, I want to come back this word fragmentation. As you're recognizing in a group that there is a fragmentation, what is happening for you internally? Like, how are you tracking that? And what does your facilitator start to say in response to that? Like, what's the next step when noticing fragmentation is arising in the group?
Yeah, these are really good questions. So I want to slow down and sense how I feel fragmentation in a group. I mean, energetically, I think I feel it's like a kind of tension inside myself, which of course may be something to do with me, but it may have something to do with the group. So that's one thing. I think we also want to be humble enough as facilitators not to assume that everything I'm receiving is I'm a pure vase and everything I'm receiving is a reflection of the group. Of course, there may be things happening in me also. I think I start to feel a kind of tightness and tension in me, like a fragmentation that's represented in me. Then what I might notice in the group are different signals, kind of speeding up or sudden silence, where there's a kind of numbness that arises in the group, or conflict is not necessarily a sign of fragmentation. That's important to name, because a coherent group can also hold conflict, but it holds it in relationship to each other.
Yeah.
So people checking out, people starting to check their phones, people asking for a break, like those things are all signs that like a group is starting to fragment, which often means that we may have hit a hot spot that people don't really want to go towards or don't quite know how to navigate, let's say. We've hit an edge also. So when we hit an edge in a group, we want to slow down and process the edge, like notice that we're now at an edge. Nothing wrong with being at an edge. Nothing wrong with anything that happens in a group. When we meet an edge, like now we're starting to hit something and we can feel a bit of resistance. If we don't process the resistance, the group will probably fragment. Because some people will go, oh, but we should go in. No, and we have different orientations. So if we notice the edge and we name it, so I think one core skill for a facilitator is to name what they're noticing, name what you're noticing. I notice we're now getting very fast. I notice that many people are calling for a break. It's interesting. My sense is that we're not quite ready for a break. Well, I notice a lot of people are calling for a break. Or I notice whatever. I notice that some people are starting to have little side conversations. That's a pretty obvious sign of the fragmentation.
Mm-hmm.
But naming what you notice and slowly, and not making it wrong. Like another core skill or core orientation for a facilitator is not to make anything wrong. Right? This is an adaptive response. So something's happening, we name it, we notice it, and then we go, oh, curious, interested. What do you think is happening? Or I might think what I think is happening, but maybe other people have thoughts about what's happening. And as you start to presence what's happening, come back to presence again, and to really presence what's happening, the group starts to become more coherent because it is seen and felt and heard and acknowledged. So I think, so noticing what's happening in me, bringing that out, slowing down, naming what I'm experiencing, starts to kind of rebuild. If it wants to be rebuilt, it might be that actually incoherence is better for the group right now, and actually we shouldn't be having this conversation. Like I'm saying that because I think we don't want to put ourselves under pressure. Now I need to build the group coherence again. That will happen naturally as it arises, or it won't.
I'm very curious too about this choice point, as you're saying, when we're coming up to the fragmentation, and then it could be that the group isn't ready to go there, but it could be that they need to be supported because they don't know how to go there. And I'm just so curious, like that choice point as a facilitator is such a big moment as the driver of the ship, to say, I'm gonna take us there. It's like it's a brave moment of leadership to not know and take the risk anyway, or to back up and say, this is indicating to me that there isn't a readiness or a capacity to go there.
Right. But you use a very interesting phrase. You said as the driver of the ship, right?
Yes.
So that's a question for me. What is really the driver of the ship? Because if I feel like I'm the driver of the ship, then I'm lost. My sense is, and this is also maybe a more kind of, let's say, mystical understanding of facilitation, but I think that's also what this is about really, is that there is a higher organizing principle that is actually the driver of the ship. And my job as a facilitator is to be in dialogue with the higher organizing principle of the group, and then to allow that to manifest through me. So it's not so much that I feel we now need to do this.
Right.
It's more that something is coming through me that indicates, that's telling me the group isn't ready for this, or the group is ready for this. So I need to get myself a little bit out of the way with the kind of, I know what's good for the group. The group is not ready for this. So now the group is ready for this. You just need a bit of encouragement. For as long as the I is driving the ship, I'm going to be keeping things on a certain horizontal plane. And part of the practice, I think, is to empty this vessel enough to listen and co-create with the higher organizing principle. There is something that wants to happen in a group. It comes together for a reason, and there's something that wants to happen in a group. My job is not to have too many ideas about what that ought to be.
Yes.
And to allow that to come through.
Yeah, the analogy I would use would be, for me, and tell me if this fits or not, would be less of a surgeon and more of a midwife. So the midwife but the midwife for me in the driving would still make the decision, does this woman need to go to the hospital, or is this baby going to be able to be birthed at home? Like there's still a guidance that's coming from the leadership of being able to make that call in those challenging moments.
Yes, there is. I'm not saying there's no agency in the facilitator. There is, but where it comes from is important. Because if I feel like I'm doing this, like a midwife is reading the signals. I think it's a good analogy. It's a good metaphor. So the midwife is also reading the signals, right? So it's maybe not so much, I mean, there's a decision, but that decision is informed by a lot of things.
Yes.
So by medical science, by instinct, like an experienced midwife will make a different decision from an inexperienced midwife because there's more kind of information in the field for her or him. But there's that place where we allow a decision to kind of come through us a bit more than feel like I'm going to decide now. Like the other day, I was running a group here, actually running a group called, not the other day, feels like the other day, it's about a year ago. Anyway, a while ago, I was running this training on the art of facilitating transformational fields. So I have a bit of a schedule because also it's a training. It's not just a facilitating of an open-ended conversation. So it's a bit of a schedule. I feel like we're going to try and cover these topics in this kind of order. And then somebody brings on a part of a check-in, they bring the subject of grief. Right? They say, I just want to say, like, to be present here, I'm grieving the loss of a partner. Right? And they speak it, and we make a little space for that because that's necessary for this person's full attendance. And then somebody else speaks about grief, and somebody else speaks about grief. And I think, oh, actually, what's arising now in the group? We're not going to discuss and practice facilitating small groups, conversations about blah, blah, blah. We need to integrate the grief that's here. Right? Now, you could say that's a decision I made, but it felt much more like that's what the higher organizing principle is showing me. Right now, there's a lot of grief in the room that people are sitting on. Let's make a space for that. And I don't know if it's going to last for 10 minutes or for an hour or the whole day. I have no idea. But I know that right now is not the time to do this, to do what the schedule was telling me to do. The time now is to make space for grief. And we make space for it, and it runs for about 2 hours, and different people grieve, and I bring some poetry that supports the grieving process, and different things come into the space. And then it feels like now it's kind of done. Like, how do you know it's done? It just feels like it's done. Right? It feels like now we've emptied out the well of grief to some degree. Of course, there's more grief, there's always grief. But there's enough that now we're ready to move back. And there's a kind of conversation with the group about that also. But that's an example in a way where I don't feel like I made a decision.
Right.
It's more like that higher organizing principle is orchestrating something in the space.
You said yes to what wanted to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the decision that you make.
Right. Exactly. Just saying yes.
Saying yes to that.
Yes.
Exactly. And sometimes that requires some courage.
Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't. It just feels obvious and easy.
Yes.
But,
yeah.
And also just to follow that example, 1 or 2 people later are irritated.
Yes.
That's what's happened. I was ready to do this. I was going to practice my facilitation, and you went into all this grief stuff. Yeah, okay, that's how it is. Not everyone's going to be happy all the time.
This was actually my next question, because this style of beingness through emergence and what wants to happen can be so disorienting and unsettling for people. I find, and I'm curious about your experience, that there's a translation and almost like, I don't know, a buy-in to have people onboarded with this way of being that isn't so methodically planned and organized, and there's what's coming next, and I need to know what's going to happen next so I can get myself ready. And I'm curious some of the ways you found to meet that, because it's one of the bigger humps to get over, just to be able to have the freedom to hold the space in this way.
Absolutely. So for me, a lot is in the framing. A lot is in the framing, and a lot is in the original contract. Like whether it's an explicit or implicit contract. Like you write up a training, and I always say, if I'm writing up anything, I say, and this process is highly emergent, so we may do something very different depending on what the interests are of the group and what's happening in the world. Because also we want to pay attention to what's happening in the world, right? If October 7th breaks out in the middle of your facilitation of a meeting, then you're probably going to pay attention to it. Or 9/11 happens, you're going to pay attention to it. So many other things may also happen in the space. So I think that's part of it, is being upfront that this is also going to be an emergent process. Like yesterday, I was facilitating something yesterday. This was actually yesterday, not a year ago. Yesterday afternoon, I'm facilitating a what we call a collective trauma lab. So there's 36 people. We meet once a month. It's called the collective trauma of being Jewish, persecution and perpetration.
Wow.
It's a particular trauma integration facilitation practice process. So I'm facilitating with a colleague, and we had a bit of a plan. We were going to bring some news items and see how people relate to them and what happens in your body, heart, mind when you see these news items. And that's how we were going to negotiate this particular or navigate this particular 2 hours. And then we started with a check-in. And we said we're halfway through this year-long process. So we just started to how's it going to you? And that became the whole 2 hours. Lots of people wanted to speak. So then we have to become very emergent, right? But it's not like we decide to be emergent. It's much more like she and I, it's all online, but she and I can see and feel like the higher organizing principle of the group is saying, we don't want to do this other practice. We want to hear each other's voices now. And there's voices that are coming forward that will help us weave the tapestry of the group into some deeper coherence. So we spend the 2 hours doing that. Now, at some point in the middle of that, I also named that that's what we're doing. Because we had started by saying the trajectory for these 2 hours is we're going to have a little bit of space for others, and then we're going to bring these news items about something contemporary. And so clearly we're not doing that. And you can now start to feel like one or two people are starting to feel, what happened to the plan? You were going to do this. I'm prepared for some contemporary news and I'm bracing myself for what you're going to bring, right? But you can feel it, right? I can feel it in the space. And then I name it and go, you'll notice that we're not doing what we said. And you can feel the group goes,
yeah,
that's right. We're not doing that. We're doing this. And then there's permission.
Yes. So the translation of and kind of naming what's happening and continually being in a present moment, naming is what will relax and subside those people. I mean, they might still have like energy around that. I don't think always just the naming is like, oh, thank you. It's also like, but, and I want, and my, there is still that. And you've talked a little bit also about this, like using disagreements as signposts to where, like, and I think this is also part of the higher organizing principle that disagreements aren't not supposed to happen, but they are directing us towards something that we might need to look at or integrate.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be curious, I imagine you have a good example of a moment where there was some disagreement or some disruption and that it led you somewhere completely unexpected.
That's interesting. You assume I have a good example for that.
I assume. Maybe.
What comes to me more is when there's disagreement. I mean, I'm not sure that I'm sitting actually with an example, but when there is disagreement, it's much more for me. Yeah, maybe I don't know if it's an example or not, but it's more for me about how do we each sit with the disagreement? Like, do I polarize? Do I go, oh, that's wrong, this is right, I have a position, we need to get, even as a facilitator, do I feel like, well, they're right, and this is irritating, and this is like a wrong intervention, and why is that person saying something? Like, it's much more interesting for me to kind of track what's happening inside me, and also with the group participants, how we hold the disagreement. There are disagreements in this lab, for sure. Right? There are people who feel, and I don't want to get highly political in this space here with you now, but there are for sure disagreements, like different orientations toward Gaza, towards what's happening with the Palestinians, towards Israel. And I'm not so interested in facilitating to an outcome where we all agree something. It's much like, so how do we host the disagreement?
Beautiful.
How do I not do that by othering you and making you wrong? I'm feeling like righteous indignation that my position is the best position, and how can you possibly not see it? That just adds to the polarization in the world, which is exactly what we want to not contribute more to.
Yes.
So I'm more interested in a way in how we hold disagreement, because where there are, now I do have examples coming to me, where the more we can hold the disagreement, the more something can also synthesize. Because there's wisdom in all these positions, if I can also sense the deeper river flowing underneath the disagreement. There might be like a political disagreement here, but underneath there's maybe something where we connect, maybe on the basic needs or intention or other places where we connect, and then we can synthesize something in that place. So for me, it's about holding and hosting, and I'm much more interested in how we host disagreement and how a group hosts disagreement, which I say can still be held within a coherent field, or does the disagreement fragment the field? So fragmenting the field means I don't feel you anymore.
Right.
That's really the essence of fragmentation, is I don't feel you anymore.
Right.
If I feel you, I can feel the relational connection. Even if I disagree 1,000% with what you're saying, I can still feel as a human being. I haven't turned away from you. It's like I have a connected no.
Yes.
Rather than a disconnected no. A disconnected no is a fragmented field. A connected no is a coherent field with some intense different perspectives.
Yes.
And they're very different things. So I'm interested in how we practice a connected no. Like I'm interested to sit in a room with Donald Trump, let's say, where I have a bit of a no to. But how could I stay connected with my no? And how do I polarize and say, he's just da 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 da. I don't want to have anything to do. I turn away. Like that's the root cause of the problem is the turning away movement.
Yes. Yes.
I used to work with young offenders, as I said at the beginning, and adult offenders. So I was working with sex offenders and people who committed all sorts of horrific crimes. And how do you do that and stay connected to the person? I have a no to the offense, but I have to find love for the person, or I'm lost, or it's not the right job for me. And as a facilitator, you have to be able to love everyone, keep your heart open to everyone, and try to support that movement, because that means we can hold the differences, we hold the disagreements, and probably something interesting comes out of that.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. There's the work of the facilitator is to continually find the places where your capacity is limited and to expand to hold more and more and more and more.
Yeah, exactly. And to notice where your limitations are with a lot of compassion also. Yeah, this I can't hold.
Yeah.
This is beyond my capacity. This is too much of a stretch. Now I need a co-facilitator, or somebody else needs to do this work. This is too much for me. That's also legitimate and fine, and I think we need to have compassion for where we meet our limits. And the other thing I would say, which is I think super important, is that we need to have places we go to for reflection. So whether it's intervision, where I kind of reflect with my peers, or supervision, where I reflect with somebody who I kind of pay for supervision to kind of receive some kind of perspective on it. But I need to have places I go where I take the difficult moments, because the difficult moments, exactly as you say, are my growing moments.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Like if I come out of a facilitation, well, this is also interesting to me, where I get tired, right? Like often if I'm in flow, I'm sure it's the same for you. You're nodding and smiling already. Like when we're in flow, we don't get tired, right? We can facilitate for a week and you just end up with more energy than you started with.
Multiple weeks, yeah.
Multiple weeks, right? Because something is just flowing through, right?
Yes.
It's energizing, it's lovely.
Yes.
When I come out tired,
Yes.
there's information. What made me tired? Why did I get tired? Because I'm trying something, or because I'm suppressing a feeling of irritation with somebody, or because whatever. Like, take the tiredness to supervision.
Yeah.
Take it to somewhere for reflection. And two things happen. One is I learn about myself and I maybe integrate the experience. Actually, three things happen. So I learn about myself. I maybe start to integrate the difficult experience, so I don't carry it with me. But also, this may also sound a little bit more, let's say, mystical perspective, because I'm revisiting this experience with somebody who is, let's say, highly sensitive and trained, it actually repatterns the experience itself. So when I'm in supervision, working on a difficult interaction I have with a group participant, the participant will also be repatterning through my taking it to supervision, because we're not so much actually in linear time as we think we are. So my experience is that it also, and this is also what people experience in constellation work, you kind of work on a constellation and go home and your family is different. Right? Even though it's not just that you're different, like something has happened in the system. So when I take a topic to supervision, it also affects the people that I'm receiving supervision about. So that's a great thing to build into your practice.
That's really, really beautiful. I really love that reframe because there can be such a tension around confidentiality and like what happens in these spaces stays here and we can't talk about it. And I've really encouraged a lot supervision, mentorship, and getting support. And I love this reframe to share this with facilitators of the transformational continuation of a process that exists as they continue to work through the blocks and limitations they've entered in groups.
Exactly. Yeah. It's win-win-win. It's a really good thing to do. Yeah.
Yes, gorgeous.
Maybe one other thing I just want to name, because we're talking about support and supervision, is I also find it helpful to have kind of intervision or have somebody kind of supporting me who's maybe not even there. Like if I'm running a group on my own, I do a lot of work on my own. So I'm running a group on my own. I will often tell somebody else, I'm running this group next Thursday, or I'm doing a 3-day process in Poland with XYZ. Just hold me in your awareness. Right? If somebody back home or somebody wherever they may be is holding me in their awareness, maybe there's somebody that I can also phone at the end of the day if I've had a difficult moment. Maybe not. That's like ideal. But even if they're not available like that, so somebody's holding me and the group in their awareness. So there's more than me in the space. In the space, there's a higher organizing principle coming through me into the space. And there's a physical being who I know, love, trust, admire, respect, who's also holding me in their awareness. And they're also in the space with me. That's a great resource.
And you call this intervision.
I call it intervision, where it's more like on a peer level. So supervision, I go to somebody who I would usually kind of pay for supervision from. Intervision is like on a par with me, like my colleagues.
Beautiful.
Where we do it for each other, and we just like a mutual support space.
Super beautiful. I love that. I haven't heard of that before, but I love this. Yeah. I want to talk about something that's coming through me because it is also my own experience. Is you beautifully refer to the higher organizing principle, and I imagine that there is a place where your work is being guided that has to do with this higher organizing principle as you continue to empty and like channel or allow. There's somewhere where you're being taken. And I'm curious to just invite you to share a little bit of that. I don't know if you've spoken a lot about the leader as mystic and kind of coming out of training facilitation and more into leadership. I'm imagining it might be in that direction, but I would just love to hear, like, where do you feel you're being guided, even if you don't know the destination yet?
Do you mean in life or in facilitation, or
is there a difference?
Where do you mean?
Yeah, it could be both, actually. I'm curious, like how this is something I'm just fascinated by, is where you're being guided professionally and also how that's impacting your personal life, or vice versa, where you're being guided in your personal life and how that's impacting you professionally.
Yeah, to me, it's all one in a way, because my practice is, as I said, I think a bit earlier, is to meditate an hour a day in the morning. And in the meditation, there's 2 movements in my meditation practice. So one is a kind of spaciousness practice, a presence practice, just sensing, listening. And the other is what I would call, or Thomas Hugel, my teacher, also has taught me, the light meditation. So it's more kind of opening the crown and going up to receive, like the soul impulse, let's say, coming through me into life. And my experience has been, and I say this with, I feel like it's a sacred thing to talk about. So I want to talk about it sensitively, not just like, oh, this is what you do. It's not like a technique. It's more, I notice I feel quite touched as I speak about it, because it has a kind of sacredness to it for me. But it's really, and the more I do it, and I've been doing this practice for kind of 15, 20 years now, I feel like my life becomes more soul-led, let's say. So instead of feeling like I'm a personality with a soul, it's like I feel like I'm a soul living in a personality. Let's put it that way. So I feel more because drawing in light or kind of building a bridge from this to the soul feels like it starts to then infuse all aspects of life. And so it infuses my decisions, it infuses my relationships, it infuses my work, it infuses everything with a kind of, I would hope, with a kind of higher frequency of transmission and of presence and of clarity of what I want to do and what I don't want to do and where I'm going and where I'm not going. It's like decisions become much, much simpler. My whole life becomes much simpler because there's a deeper listening vessel that is receiving more clear impulses that say, now I need to do this. Right? David Whyte wrote this wonderful poem, Start Close In. Start close in, take the first step, not the second or the third step, take the first step. And sometimes we want to take like 15 steps at the same time and know where it's going to end up.
Yes.
That's not life, right? Life is you take one step and then the next step reveals itself. So, I'm clear like what the next step is, like in my life at the moment, I'm clear. And that's what I'll take and then we'll see what happens.
Mm. Mm.
But that's a practice, like to build, and that's an orientation, if you like. Like for me, it's clear that I have a soul. Not everybody would feel that necessarily. That's also a privilege to feel that. But I feel like I have a soul, and I feel like I want to listen to that. I want to be guided by that. I want to know how to cultivate a connection to that and live from that place.
Mm. Mm. Beautiful. Thank you. I found myself just getting emotional as you're talking. I can tap into the frequency of sacredness of your practice and how you're living it. And I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and thank you for the reception, because if you're not able to receive it, it's probably harder for me to speak it also.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling it. It's really touching me. And I'm curious also about your work in the world and the groups that you're leading, and just to hear a little bit about where do you see the evolution of your group work heading, based off where we're situated right now in the world and in our cultures and community. Just would love to hear a little bit. It's almost like I imagine there's a deeper why there that becomes more and more revealed.
Yeah, I guess I think of it in terms of what becomes more and more essential. Like, what is my essence that wants to express itself in the world? Which means it becomes clearer what I say yes and no to. So I want to carry on coaching people because I really like coaching people, and because I feel like with a long-term coaching relationship, I can feel movement in people and growth and development, and people starting to fulfill their potential and starting to become more essential in themselves. So the kind of people that I coach often come with kind of deep life questions about purpose and meaning, and I feel very fulfilled in supporting people with that kind of inquiry. And similarly then in groups, so I'm less interested in, as I say, like in like formal leadership training, but I'm more interested in what I'm doing at the moment, this training in applied mysticism, which is to say, in order to meet and have any sense of orientation and agency in the poly crisis that we're in at the moment, we need to tap into something beyond our five senses. We need to tap into some deeper, higher river of information, insight, energy. And that's what I would call a contemporary embodied mysticism. And that's going to be the direction for me. It's not so much like what type of group. I don't mind in a way what type of group. It's more like that's what I want to bring into the world. And when I named this course, it was an interesting moment for me, because it's the first time I named a course as a training in applied mysticism. Like usually I would smuggle it in through the back door and say it's really about an inspirational leadership training, but actually what I'm doing is this. And this time I thought, no, I want the people who come to come because they want to be talking about mysticism and that they have a similar orientation around that, and that makes sense to them because it makes sense to me, and then we can journey far and deep with each other. So that's what I want to do, and that's what I will be doing, I imagine. And whoever comes, you know. But I feel like that's the note I want to sound in the world.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm so happy to be talking with you about it. You have the generosity to invite me into your podcast to share some of these reflections, and that's no question when you ask me. It's like it's a clear yes, I want to do this because this is a space I can also share the deeper movements in myself.
Mm. 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 Thank you. I'm very much in my feeling body right now and feeling you a lot, and your also generosity and your care and your tenderness, and what you're opening up inside yourself, and in a way like inviting us all into. And I really appreciate you continuing to take those steps and open your arms and invite us in and let go of any need or desire for it to look a particular way. But it's like residing in the perfection that is here waiting for us to realize it.
Yeah, and residing, and it touches me how you reflect that back to me, and it's residing in the imperfection that is the perfection. Lao Tzu writes about it very beautifully. Lao Tzu, the great Chinese philosopher, says, true perfection seems imperfect, perfectly itself. I think there's so much wisdom in that. Like we see things, it's not quite right yet, but there's, well, Leonard Cohen put it there, light comes through the cracks. Like the cracks are also part of the perfection. The imperfection is part of the perfection. You can lean into that. Then I don't want the world to be a particular way. And I'm going to meet the world more as it is. And from there, things will start to evolve and move and grow as they're meant to, or not grow as they're meant to.
So beautiful.
And maybe the last thing I want to say is, the last thing probably is time. I just remember this moment when I wrote the outline for the course. It sounds a bit strange, but it's like I didn't really care if nobody came. Of course, on one level, I cared a lot whether people came or not. But there's another part of me thought, I feel totally satisfied that this is what I want to put out into the world. And whoever comes, you know, but this is what I want to do. And if one person comes, it's enough. If 100 people come, it's enough. But like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just an interesting moment for me to realize that I wasn't kind of feeling like, will people like this? And, you know, is it going to attract enough people? And what's the right marketing jargon? And what are the buzzwords? Yeah. It's like, no, this is what I want to say to the world. And here it is. And now we put it out there.
Yeah.
For sure, I did other work. You know, I did masterclasses and all sorts of, you know, stuff. But it, like, the content was totally clear. And I thought, that's what I want to do. And whoever comes, alhamdulillah.
Yeah. I know this place so well. It's such a shift, and I'll just try to name some words for it myself. But it was like, for me, there was the beginning was like this reaching or being in service of and trying to meet a need through my delivery. And then that shift for me was, how can I just open the doors and say, this is how I want to play. And if you want to play, you're invited. Exactly. But there was so much less of this grabbing, reaching energy, and much more of a blossoming and just like opening my hands and saying, like, here, this is the frequency I'm in touch with. This is what I want to play. And in that it's complete in and of itself. I don't need anything or anyone to justify or to meet me in that, because there's like a wholeness that I'm embodying through. This is just where I'm at and what you're invited to join me in.
Totally, exactly the same. Exactly.
Yeah. It's a monumental shift as a professional, but also as a person to make that gear shift.
Totally. Because it comes from a place, exactly as you say, it comes from a place, I would say, of kind of deep soul listening. And like that's the essential need that I put out into the world. And it resonates or it doesn't resonate, but that's the essential need that I put out into the world.
Yeah.
And probably, if it really is from a soul sense, it will also resonate because part of the soul is also resonating with other souls. It's not just like, oh, this is what I want to do. It's like,
Yeah.
what I want to do is also in relationship to the world.
Yes.
So it probably will also meet a need in the world.
Yes. Yes. I love that. The essential me.
Yeah.
Oh, Robin, thank you so much for this time. I could keep going. I have a whole nother page of thoughts and questions and inquiries, but we'll save it. I imagine there'll be more time. I'm so happy to have met you and come in contact with your work. I wonder if you want to share where people can find you. What is the best place for people if they'd like to go deeper with you?
Well, that's very kind of you. Firstly, I've really enjoyed this time with you also. I feel like you ask great questions and we're on a similar frequency and it's really nice to evolve this conversation with you. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
And you can find me on LinkedIn. I think I kind of post pretty much everything I do on LinkedIn or articles from time to time. And, my wife and I run a business called Open Circle Consulting. So there's a website, opencircle.com. No, opencircle.live. Sorry, I don't often have to Google it myself. But if you look at Open Circle Consulting, you'll find it. And that's where you'll find the kind of body of work that we're engaged in also. I mean, she does very different work at the moment, but we run a company together.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this time and your work and your love and your heart. And see you again soon.
Very much so. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Robin. And thank you for listening to this 5th episode of In Presence We Trust. In episode 6, I'm going to be joined by another very special being and dear friend, Catherine Hale. Catherine and I speak into the importance and very strong need in today's world for facilitators to be trauma-informed, to practice self-care and embodiment. This deeply inspiring conversation covers a massive range of topics like menopause, neurodivergence, wealth, money, the nervous system, and the use of psychedelics, while always emphasizing the need for ongoing learning and growth. Until next week, check out my website for more information on upcoming courses with myself and some of my interview guests. There's always a link in the show notes. Special thank you to all the beings who have contributed to the creation of this podcast: Michelle, Vaishnavi, Joby, Lavinia, and the sound fields, Thomas and John. And thank you again for joining me as we continue this journey and open up a new communal space and learning environment that is In Presence We Trust. You can subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to like and comment below. Until next time, deep breath.